Hello and welcome to Tonnau Talks. Today we're going to be talking about selective mutism. My name's Dr Kathryn and I have with me today Dr Kathryn Edwards. Welcome, Kathryn.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for coming in today and having a chat with us about selective mutism. First of all, before we get started, I know we're going to talk a great deal about selective mutism, but just for our listeners listening in, just to make sure that you're aware that obviously we can't cover everything in this short space of time. We are going to, touch on the main points, but obviously with these things that we could, potentially miss. So for those listening, please have a look in our episode description, because in that we will have additional resources of where to find out more information on this very interesting topic. So to get started, can you tell me, Kathryn, how did you become interested in selective mutism?
Well, when I was training to become an educational psychologist, a case was kind of brought up in the Emotional Health and Psychological Wellbeing Forum, which was about an individual with selective mutism. And the school just wanted kind of support for this. They didn't really know anything about it. So I was tasked with kind of researching and providing training. Unfortunately, this was February 2020, so that training never actually happened.
Oh gosh, yeah.
We went to
remember those times.
Lockdown.
Yeah.
But the condition kind of fascinated me so much that I just kind of continued with the research into it and decided that that would be my focus and for my thesis, particularly as at the time of writing my thesis and when I was researching it at the first kind of aspect of it. There was only one academic paper that was written by an educational psychologist on the condition.
Really?
So I felt like this was an area that needed to be explored kind of further then. But actually, the most important aspect that made me want to work with this area is that it's one of the few conditions we as educational psychologists can work with, that with kind of early intervention, sound support and guidance, the individual can overcome it and can flourish.
Oh, okay, that's really interesting. So you'd never really come across this topic before in your training, and it was something that was brought up by a school in one of your meetings, kind of the highlight kind of, a child presenting with what possibly could be selective mutism. And it's interesting, isn't it, to find that even in 2020, there was such little research on this, because as we know, with education, with psychology, all that kind of research, there's always a lot that goes into different conditions. So I'm surprised to know that there was only sort of such limited research on it, which is something that, is key in helping us kind of identify conditions and also, like you say, provide that intervention and support. And it's really lovely that you say that this is something that I know a lot of families that might be listening might be worried about something like selective mutism. It sounds, like it's a, quite a serious condition, which I can imagine when we talk more into it, it does have those aspects of it. But I think it's great for us to start with that message that, children can flourish and overcome it. It's not a lifelong condition like something that's maybe, neurodiverse or something like that. So that's really good to hear for our listeners, isn't it? That, this is something that you can support with. So let's go into it then, Katie. Can you tell me what does selective mutism actually mean?
Well, selective mutism is a rare anxiety disorder that impairs the child or young person's daily functioning. So that just means that in the kind of the family of anxiety disorders, you don't hear about it often.
Okay.
The kind of prevalence, so that means how many individuals with the condition is quite small compared to other kind of ones. I don't want to guess, but I think it's 1 in 140 children have it. And then that goes to 1 in 1,000 children, young people then when it gets to teenagers and adolescents.
Okay, so that does show us then that children can improve, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So if you're not seeing large numbers when they're much older, that means actually those that had it when they were younger, because 1 in 100 and so children, if you've got a small primary school of say 300 children, that's at least 3 that would probably have it. And then when you're talking about 1 in 1,000 in one of those big comps, that shows, doesn't it, that how that in a way, for want of a better word, they can grow out of it, but with the right support.
Yes,
yeah.
and I think that's the important part of it, is they do need the support kind of early on and that kind of thing. So selective mutism is characterized by a consistent failure to speak in specific social situations in which there's an expectation of speaking. So this can be school, despite speaking in other situations such as the home. But most importantly, selective mutism is not a choice.
And I think that is really important to note here, because with the word selective, it kind of implies that it is a choice, that I'm going to choose to speak to you, but I'm not going to choose to speak to my teacher, for example.
Absolutely. And there's been loads of different name changes. So it was kind of, previously it's been known as voluntary aphasia and then elective mutism, but then it was kind of seen that they were electing not to speak.
Yeah.
So selective was chosen. And I think the idea behind selective is that it was in select environments rather than they're selecting. But obviously it's getting kind of misconstrued as well because of that kind of title. So there are discussions about what it should be called, but at the moment in time, it is still kind of selective mutism.
And I think that word mute as well implies that there's nothing at all. There's no language whatsoever. But in fact, it's not that. It's a reduction rather than a total refusal, isn't it? Or inability to speak or communicate.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that in the DSM criteria, so that's the kind of specific guidelines that we would have to follow to kind of diagnose it. It states there that it can't be kind of, there is an expectation for speech. They can't be fully mute.
Yeah.
To have selective mutism. So that definition is that mutism should occur consistently in situations where there's the expectation for speech. So these are educational, occupational, social settings. A child or adult is able to speak in other situations, so they aren't fully mute. The disorder lasts for more than a month, excluding the first month of a child's school life. Yeah. Because that's kind of anxious for a lot of children.
Yeah, things like that. Absolutely.
Mutism is not better explained by a communication disorder, autism, schizophrenia, or a psychotic disorder, and that there's no more apparent explanation for mutism, such as the lack of knowledge or comfort with the spoken language in a given setting. So, for example, if a child or an adult's moved to a new culture or a new country with different kind of language there. However, there are some kind of important caveats to be aware of. Yeah. So although this is the guidelines we have to kind of follow, there are kind of conflicting aspects in the research then. So selective mutism can be progressive to a point where a child, a young person or adult cannot speak to anybody. So it can lead to full mutism. Including those they were previously able to. So if it's kind of not tackled or handled in the right way, it can progress the mutism. I think the important part with that is that they were able to speak prior to the mutism.
There's not like a language disorder where they haven't developed those language skills. Absolutely. It's a child who's got that language ability to a certain level, but then is unable to voice their needs and wants and opinions in certain arenas and environments. And I think, you know, what you mentioned there is that without the right support, some children can develop into adults where they become what you'd say like entirely mute. That's very rare, isn't it?
Absolutely, very, very rare. And usually they are kind of noted beforehand and things like that. It's something to be mindful of, that these are things that can happen, because
and it can deteriorate, can't it, without the right intervention.
You mentioned it is something that you can overcome, but it is a serious condition as well, so we do have to take it kind of seriously. There is another caveat, so it's around how selective mutism has been identified in the research with kind of co-occurring or comorbidity with other conditions. So that just means that you can have the diagnosis of selective mutism with another diagnosis such as autism. So this can be confusing when you're looking at the DSM-5 criteria, when it says that it's not better explained by these kind of disorders.
And I think what you're saying there as well is that having autism doesn't mean that you're more susceptible to having selective mutism, but they can occur together in their own right.
And it's just important that we rule out the other factors as being a reason for it as well. And then lastly, whilst mutism can be temporary for a child or young person moving into a new culture or a new country, in some cases, this form of mutism can then be a trigger for selective mutism in itself. So selective mutism can kind of present from as early as 2.5 years old, but it's typically only noticed first when the child is between 5 and 8. And that's just because that's when they start in the different settings. So you've got the, preschool, you've got nurseries and things like that. So it becomes more pronounced. You've got that second setting where they aren't talking, yet they're talking freely in the house and things like that.
Yeah. And I think that can be really confusing for people, can't it? Because, for example, if you're a parent, you take your child to reception, it's the autumn term, they've gone through and started to do the school plays, and maybe a teacher's mentioned that they're very shy or they're very quiet, and you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, they're not like that in the house. They're very talkative. They don't, they're never quiet. I think it's really important for us to recognize, like, when is it a selective mutism? When is it something like being a bit shy, being a bit more reserved? Because some children, especially when they start in primary school, if they've, especially, if they've kind of been at home with parents in that safe environment where they can freely talk, and when going to somewhere like a school is such a big change, I think it's important for us to kind of not rush into thinking that it is selective mutism, and that actually, these skills to be able to communicate with people other than your immediate family is something that needs to be trained and developed in children, and I, being a parent myself, I remember, reminding my daughter to look at people when he spoke to her, making sure she spoke of the voice that they could hear, because she'd whisper sometimes. And it's like, it's important for us to remember that we do have to train our children
100%.
Those skills to be able to communicate effectively.
And I think that's why the DSM-5 criteria has that kind of prerequisite that it has to be at least 1 month. And it's not the month of the first school life, it has to be longer than that kind of thing. And I think the difference between shy children and the children with selective mutism is that the child with selective mutism won't typically talk. And it's the anxiety that's stopping them from talking. With shy children, they can be coaxed to talk. They just need to kind of be warm in that kind of environment and things like that. It's not anxiety that's underlying that's affecting them as well.
Yeah, that's really important to note. Thank you. So on that note, talking about shyness, we've mentioned there, and like understanding that there's quite a specific criteria about recognizing and identifying what selective mutism is. What does it actually look like then? At what point will we know that a child is actually presenting with something like selective mutism rather than it just being shyness?
Okay, so although selective mutism mainly affects speech, and we've gone a lot on the kind of speech, it actually affects all avenues of communication.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
So this can include kind of written language, so putting pen and pencil to paper, particularly if they're writing about themselves, or if the task is kind of an imaginative task. So it's not a simple yes and no answer. They can be really hard for the child to kind of interact with. It might be their body language. So their own body movements can expose their anxieties. So they tend to move kind of woodenly, or they might freeze completely in certain situations.
Okay.
It can be their expressive body language. So individuals with selective mutism tend to kind of hide their true emotions. They hide or minimize their facial expressions in trigger situations, for example. And they may tend to either smile or maintain certain fixed facial expressions, regardless of how they are actually truly feeling.
And that's where I think some children can be misunderstood as, I've seen some children grinning when they may be, reprimanded or something like that.
Absolutely.
And parents can find that frustrating because actually, we're thinking, oh, I'm telling you that you've done something wrong. Actually, you're smiling at me. Again, that ties in nicely with the fact that, although this is about selective mutism, a lot of our children may do that, mightn't they? When they feel a little bit anxious about something and unsure, the facial expression doesn't quite match what they're thinking inside and in context with the situation.
100%. And in like selective mutism particularly, but I suppose in any kind of anxious situation, if you are a freezer, there is a frozen emotionless expression that many children with selective, not all obviously, but many have. and it's often kind of interpreted as a smirk.
Ah, okay.
So a lot of individuals in the research suggest that, you know, kind of the teachers and parents and other family members can see it as being quite rude.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
it's not. It's just them in this kind of fight, flight, freeze kind of state then.
And that's hard, isn't it, for adults around these children, because, you know, we rely heavily on, you know, that non-verbal communication, which is facial expressions and body language. And if a child isn't communicating verbally or writing things down, as you say, in, you know, relevant to selective mutism, if they then got this smirk expression on their face, it's even more challenging, isn't it? And there's more kind of misunderstanding going on there. So you can understand the challenges faced by adults trying to support these children. It's really unfortunate, isn't it?
100%. And I think that's why previous kind of names and things like that have always gone along the side that it's an oppositional disorder because of all these different things. So it can be really hard to kind of be in that environment if you're not quite understanding what is going on for this young person or child.
And I suppose there, when you mention about the like an oppositional disorder, that is ultimately described often as children trying to be controlling and refusing. And that's the thing about selective mutism. It's not about them controlling things or refusing. It's simply that they are unable to communicate.
Absolutely. It's not a choice, as I said before. They physically can't. The anxiety is physically stopping them from being able to. And I think that's what we really need to get the message out about.
Yeah. And again, I think it's about making adults aware that even though there may be a facial expression that they think it, you know, resembles a smirk, which can be quite, you know, annoying to see when you're trying to communicate with someone and having that expression. It's important that adults sort of check in with themselves. You know, I can see that, you know, because often it's seen as disrespectful, and that can warrant kind of feelings of, you know, I need to kind of be a parent here and, you know, show my authority, you know, because obviously, you know, the child's facial expression and in a way not refusing to speak as it looks. You know, it's important that adults and parents kind of check in with themselves and just think, wait a minute, what is not being expressed here? You know, and trying to look at that. And I know on our Tonnau Talks, we always try and, you know, remind ourselves, isn't it, you know, to check in with ourselves, like, how am I feeling right now? Am I the right person right now to challenge this?
Yes.
And is it right to challenge it? Do I need to try and look at this in a different way? And this is an, you know, perfect topic for that, where adults around children really need to kind of step away and think, okay, what could be going on here? Because this is what I'm seeing on the outset. What's actually going on underneath?
Absolutely. And kind of working out what's going on for them. Why is this triggering me so much as well?
Yeah.
Because those are important.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, we were talking about you know, selective mutism, you know, the way it looks, you know, you mentioned there about, you know, it's not only not being able to communicate verbally, but also writing things down, you know, that, and often we rely on that then to be able to sort of be put in place for children that, you know, present with selective mutism. So it's really difficult then, isn't it, to try and unpick that. And we talked there about that, you know, the facial expression, the body language, and understanding that, you know, there's an underlying anxiety there, which is different to shyness, isn't it? You know, shyness is often a normal response to a new situation, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You know, and we'd expect children to be shy in new situations. And what we've said, you know, you've mentioned is that selective mutism isn't shyness. It is a far more complex nature of anxiety.
And if it's easier, it's better to kind of think of selective mutism as an individual is paralysed in the silent. And they're paralysed by the fear and anxiety around talking. As opposed to shyness, who they're not paralysed, they're just kind of assessing the situation.
Or maybe even on pause, and that freeze response where they're like, don't know what to say, you know. But yeah. So tell me, Kathryn, how can the presentation differ then?
Okay, so when we think about selective mutism, we also need to be thinking about kind of high profile and low profile selective mutism.
Okay.
So the high profile selective mutism is when a child does not speak at all to certain people. So in any individual that's not within their comfort zone, they can't speak to them.
Okay.
Low profile selective mutism is when a child manages to speak a little bit when absolutely necessary, but does not initiate the conversation. They won't make requests, and that's the difference with it.
Right, okay.
These individuals can often go under the radar because they can seem like they're talking. They seem like they're the shy child because they are talking.
Right,
But
okay.
it's the initiation. That's the important part there.
So what you're saying there with regards to initiation, they may respond to their teacher if asked a direct question, would you like a green pen or a yellow pen?
Absolutely.
But they would never go and request something from the teacher. They would never go and ask the teacher for help or maybe to go to the toilet. And I think sometimes in primary schools, we have a lot of children that have accidents within the classroom because they're unable to ask to go to the toilet, even though they are able to toilet themselves appropriately.
100%. That's exactly what I'm saying. So they're not able to ask for the toilet. They wouldn't be able to ask for a pen. They wouldn't be able to ask for a pencil. They might be able to ask a peer if the peers are within their comfort space, or even the teacher if the teacher is in the comfort space. But there'll be someone they won't be able to talk to in that classroom in a typical manner.
Yeah.
So when I say typical manner, it's that kind of to and fro kind of conversation. Or more than one word or 2 words. It's a full sentence, is what I mean by a typical manner. They'd be able to answer yes and no questions, not an issue kind of thing. They'd even may be able to answer kind of open-ended, but the open-ended answers will be really stunted. They'll be then one-word answer. It'll be quite monotone. It's not a typical kind of sentence that they would give.
So, for example, they could respond to, oh, what did you do on the weekend? They might say, went to Nan's house.
Yeah, and they might go park.
Yeah. Okay, so it can be that limited. So I can see now where it's quite difficult to identify these low-profile selective mutism children because, a teacher might think, well, they do talk to me, they do communicate with me most of the time, and then there's points where they have this refusal, as we want to call it, because that's how it's seen. So that can be quite, kind of complex in its way, isn't it, to understand and have empathy for as well, because again that can be seen as quite controlling and quite
and I think it's worse because a lot of these children will be able to talk to their peers, so it will be seen as a kind of attack on the teacher,
like a personal thing, isn't it?
Well, they can talk to them, but why can't they talk to me? They're choosing not to talk to me. Obviously it's not a choice, but that's how it presents.
Absolutely.
So it can be a really difficult time, especially with the low profile ones, because they are going to be more willing to talk to some people rather than others.
And I know at the beginning we mentioned that, selective mutism is kind of seen in different environments. And I think what we're learning now that even within those environments, there's many factors that could change, isn't there? Like actually in the classroom, they can speak to their peers. We often hear about children being, very quiet in the classroom, but out in the yards, they'll play with their friends and chat and whatnot. But in the classroom, they won't. But even what you're saying is that there's aspects within the classroom that they may be able to answer questions from the teacher and still talk to their peers, but the more in-depth conversations or requesting support and asking for things is very limited.
And they might not be able to answer the question in front of the class, or they might be able to answer a question in front of the class, but they wouldn't be able to put their hands up.
Right.
So if the teacher called on them, they'd be able to answer, because the anxiety of not answering is worse than the anxiety of answering. So that's the kind of barter that they have to deal with then as well.
Okay, so that's interesting. So you said that, so even if the teacher, for example, could ask the class a question, the child with selective mutism, the low profile selective mutism, could respond, but they couldn't put their hand up.
Yes, it might be even that. So that makes it even harder for the teachers to kind of understand what might be happening for these children then as well.
Yeah, that is interesting. So that shows us the type of how selective mutism not only interferes with their ability to produce spoken language, but putting their hand up to request.
And
isn't
this
it?
is like a common thing. We're going off a bit, but a common thing that I find with teachers when I work with selective mutism and things like that, they say, "Oh, well, I gave them, the hall pass, or I gave them a toilet pass, but they're still not using that, and there's still accidents."
Yeah.
But that's still initiation of conversation.
Yeah.
So that's similar to putting the hand up.
Yeah.
They physically can't initiate that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they'd be able to answer you if you went over, "Oh, do you need the toilet?" They might be able to say yes,
Yeah.
but they wouldn't be able to give you that card
Yeah.
because that's still initiation.
And also I found it with some children as well, is that, yes, they've been given the card and they don't use it. And therefore then you'd say, look, prevent them from having to to put their hand up to ask for it. They can just up and leave. And again, that can be really difficult for them, isn't it? It's like the social kind of attention,
Absolutely,
of getting up in the middle of the classroom and walking out.
Yeah, they wouldn't be able to do that with the kind of any of the selective mutism. They are highly compliant individuals. They're really anxious about kind of looking silly in front of their peers. So any kind of that kind of attention is not wanted. The kind of the low profile selective mutism individuals in particular they're still very highly compliant, but they're worried about upsetting authority figures. So that's when the speech and things will come out, because it's seen as, if I don't speak now, I'm going to upset them. So I'm going to have to. The anxiety is far higher to not speak in those kind of situations.
Okay. So when you mentioned there that these children are highly compliant, what you mean then is that they will follow instructions.
Absolutely.
They don't mean to be, disrespectful or refusing to engage. They actually desperately want to. In fact, they've got more anxiety about not complying than refusing. So it's something that they really want to avoid, is to be seen as refusing. So when they are, it's really important for us to be mindful that a child that is potentially showing signs of selective mutism, especially our low profile children, for those that are finding it very difficult to respond, they are ultimately feeling even more anxiety because they're not responding.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So in fact, what you're saying is that those children who are not responding are feeling more anxious than those that don't, as in that are kind of are able to then respond. So they feel better. Is that what you're saying?
So the ones that are able to respond, I think the difficulty is that it's where the anxiety is placed. So the ones that are able to respond and the ones that aren't, I feel have the same amount of anxieties. It's just where the anxiety is placed. So the ones that can respond, then the anxiety is placed more on the fact that if I don't speak, it's going to be worse for me than if I speak.
Right.
Whereas the children that aren't able to speak at all in that situation, the anxiety is just there around the speaking aspect of that situation.
So those would be those high profile ones.
Yes.
Okay. So when we're thinking in terms of our high profile ones who aren't able to speak, then being asked to respond verbally to something that is exacerbating their anxiety in a way.
Absolutely, yes.
Whereas our more low profile ones that do have some ability to overcome that anxiety to respond, actually they still feel that high level of anxiety.
Yes, it's just placed elsewhere. So they feel more anxious not responding than to respond. So I think in both cases, they still have the same amount of high levels of anxiety. It's just where is their place then as well.
Okay, that's really interesting. And it's so important for us to recognize that, isn't it, when we're thinking about how we communicate with these children and the impact of us, in a way, seemingly to try and help them, actually could be causing them more anxiety.
Absolutely. And I think the issue with kind of the low profile selective mutism is that they're likely to be overlooked because, as you said, they're compliant children. They're quiet. They get on with their way. They will answer some of the questions at times. They seem to be kind of functioning, but they're not. They're just full of anxiety all day, every day. And then they are actually at risk of developing high profile selective mutism.
Right, okay.
And that's kind of really important to note, is that although selective mutism kind of develops first in the early years and is the youngest of the anxiety kind of disorders, if it's picked up later on when the child is older, perhaps in kind of adolescence, then that will typically mean that the child has received either no intervention or support, or they may have had years of inappropriate intervention and support and negative reinforcement of their non-speaking, and therefore being someone who doesn't speak is likely to be part of their kind of who they are now.
Yeah, it becomes part of their identity in a way, doesn't it? And often, when children get to adolescence, they're described, oh, they're always quiet, they're always shy, they never talk, and in a way, it's something that they kind of end up living up to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And progress then is very slow because it's just ingrained into who they are.
Yeah. That's interesting. Tell me then, we're thinking about these children with selective mutism, and we mentioned about the complexities of that, talk about those high profile where they very limited, near to none language, whereas a child with low profile is quite confusing in a way because, when we think about what we're seeing is that they will communicate with different people at different times. They may respond to questionings and things like that. We mentioned there about that feeling of anxiety is still quite high in low profile and high profile. I'm just wondering, in terms of, we talk about those anxious feelings. What does it actually feel like to have selective mutism?
Well, I always say that, how do you feel when you see a spider, or when you do like public speaking, or for me, it's when I see fire, or like heights and things like that.
Yeah.
You're just really anxious and that kind of thing. That's how they feel every single day when they're not in their comfort space.
Okay. So when you're thinking in terms of our school age children, then it's more likely that in school they'd be feeling these feelings of like anxiety. And when you're saying about, I think for those people who've got a fear of spiders, seeing that spider does, cause big reaction, and often you'll see someone run away,
Absolutely.
Our children with obviously selective mutism don't always tend to run away. So are they fighting this feeling constantly?
They are fighting. They freeze. So it's a typical freeze response for this, but it's constant in those environments that they don't find comfortable. So for this example, we say the school environment, or even the shops, so they can't talk to the cashier or something like that. Or it could be the library, they can't talk to the librarian. Any place that's not their comfort zone, which is typically their home, but not always. They will feel this feeling as if they've seen the spider constantly. They are constantly on the freeze, and it must be exhausting for them. And this can feel like, a tightness in the throat, their heart rate could be increased, it could be sweating, there could be tension in the body. And that brings us back to that kind of the wooden kind of movement and things like that. But also that could be indicator for low profile selective mutism. So they should be consistently wooden.
Oh, okay.
And they should have consistent kind of facial expressions that are quite neutral.
Right, okay.
As well.
If you mean like a rest in facial expressions?
Absolutely.
Yeah? So not smiling, not kind of angry, it's just kind of flat.
Either flat or a permanent smile.
Okay. Okay, so having a permanent smile can be very misleading, can't it?
Absolutely, because it seems like you're fine,
Yeah.
but you're really not.
Yeah.
So these are the things that if you're noticing consistently that it's like the one-word answers and things like that, they're moving woodenly, they've got the permanent smile or the permanent kind of flat face, then maybe that's when you need to start unpicking, or is there something more kind of thing for it. There could be nausea or a knot or a pit in the stomach, like a feeling of being overwhelmed. They can have difficulty processing information, because I always think of it like if you were asked to sit and do a piece of work in the woods and a bear was coming right at you, you wouldn't be able to think, would you?
No.
And that's what this is like for the children with selective mutism. It's just talking is their bear.
Yeah. And again, when you said about finding it difficult to process information, that's where these children will make lots of mistakes.
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes it's misconstrued as like being clumsy, being complacent, not listening, not concentrating, always, looking around and things like that. When actually it's them trying to cope with the environment that is just is too much coming at them. Like there's too many bears in the woods then. Absolutely.
And for most children with selective mutism, they have the deficit is within the communication kind of performance
Yeah.
caused by anxiety rather than communication competence. So that just means they can talk.
Yeah.
They have the vocabulary.
Yeah.
They know how to talk.
Yeah.
But their anxiety is stopping them from talking.
Yeah. And again, I guess that in a way to help to explain to our parents, it's like that kind of, like performance anxiety. You can do a job really well, but when you're asked to do it in front of people, you lose that ability and you think, oh my gosh, why can't I do this? How, I can do this fine on my own when I'm at home or whatever. But when I have to go on that stage, have the spotlight on me, have the audience watching me, I freeze. Ultimately, what we're saying is that children are experiencing that. Those with selective mutism is like that big spotlight's on them.
Absolutely.
In their home they can sing, but when they're out of that environment. And I think it's important to note as well that even children with who have selective mutism, even when they're in their safe space, they can still struggle when something changes within that.
Absolutely. So if
like a visitor coming or
100%,
something.
and even like extended family members.
Yeah.
So a lot of family members can take offense, but it's really not, it's an anxiety. So if like auntie drops by one day, that can cause the kind of selective mutism anxiety to heighten, and they're not able to speak. They might be able to speak to gran, but not granddad, and that kind of thing. It's not something they can control.
No,
it's something that can be managed, but it's not something they can control. And it does change depending on where they are, who's coming into their environment, who's coming out to that environment as well.
And sadly, again, that's seen as quite rude, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Within families. And and I understand that. And it's about us as parents trying to think, right, okay, what is going on here? Because, these things really need to be explored in terms of, what could be causing the underlying, symptom. With the symptom is not speaking or not communicating. And actually we need to try and figure out what's going on underneath there. And in terms of selective mutism, you said about it tends to sort of happen early on in early years. It's like what you mentioned there. It's one of the earliest forms of anxiety type behaviors. So if a child develops that, we're seeing a young child start in school. We're seeing that actually they're not communicating as much in school as they do at home, but we're willing to sort of give it a bit of time first to try and, give that settling in time. We're starting to see that it's not just general shyness, that actually it's likely to be potentially low profile selective mutism. Because I feel with high profile selective mutism, the total mute is easier to spot, isn't it? Obviously.
So, yeah.
Whereas when we're thinking about our low profile selective mutisms, the children that can communicate randomly on occasions, which it doesn't seem consistent. What goes on in a child's life for it to maintain throughout adolescence? What is going on there that keeps it going?
Okay, yeah. So the things that can maintain selective mutism then are when talking is a negative experience.
What do you mean by that?
So if there's an expectation at school that individuals should talk, and this creates anxiety then, a sense of disapproval or failure and unreasonable pressure for the child when they inevitably don't speak. Therefore, they associate speaking with negative feelings.
Right, okay.
Because they're getting all those negative kind of reinforcements then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And they're attributing it all to the not speaking, as opposed to it being anything else.
Because that's the thing, isn't it? That will reinforce it. Because if I'm feeling so anxious and being put on pressure, say, for example, to then speak, that anxiety is feeding the need then to keep quiet.
Absolutely.
Because as we know, avoidance is the cure for anxiety. So if you, in a way, avoid speaking, in fact, it's in a way, sadly, causing them not to speak.
Absolutely. And that's the second point I was going to go through. So when the fear of talking is transferred through the avoidance of talking, as you were saying. So this just means that because they're scared of talking, they might avoid the talking. And this avoidance then brings just instant relief, as you said. And it reinforces the idea that, yes, there was something I needed to fear.
Yeah. It's like the evidence has proved it, isn't it?
Absolutely. And when avoidance is a positive experience then, so when avoiding participating is more rewarding than the actual participation because it brings that relief, you're not feeling anxious anymore, then that's going to maintain it also.
Yeah. It's like them then thinking, okay, I'm not going to put my hand up. because I'm not going to participate. I'm not going to join in with the school play and things like that, and rather keep quiet because actually that's better.
Absolutely.
And I think the opportunities then become narrowed, don't they?
Absolutely. And the other option is when not talking just becomes a habit.
Mm-hmm.
So we see this for kind of the older individuals in particular. So there's little or no experience of successfully mastering their anxiety, and this convinces the child that the situation is permanent, so nothing can be done. And the child becomes resigned to the non-talking role then. So they've got that self-esteem, self-identity that they are a non-talker. And this becomes part of their, way of being. And it's very difficult to change.
And that's the thing, in a way it's safer if I just stay as I am, rather than pushing through that anxiety. And people describe me as, oh, they're shy, they don't speak much. People will stop trying as well to speak. And therefore it becomes a habit then, because people are less likely to initiate conversations, which then feeds then that there's more of a silence, because there isn't the need to respond.
And individuals with selective mutism tend to be very good at finding the friends that will respond for them.
Yes.
So then they don't have to do any of the talking. It's far easier then, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like having someone to help you throughout the day, isn't it? So you mentioned at the beginning, Katie, that actually this doesn't have to be a lifelong condition. And actually with the right intervention, children can overcome it. How do we do that? How can we help? What is the right intervention for this?
Well, there isn't one right intervention. There's many interventions that can be done. And we can just go through like a snippet of all the things, because obviously we're not going to be able to go into everything right now.
Well, as you said, it's so complex and so individual for each child.
But when working with selective mutism, it's best not to work in isolation.
Okay. So don't work alone with this.
Absolutely. It's important that we get all key people involved in understanding and supporting the child then. So be it school staff, dinner ladies, extended family members. You might need to get support from, the educational psychology service, from the speech and language service. Could be from CAMS. It's best not to do it alone. It's not going to work that way.
And when you think about parents as well, often they're not the right place to do it, because actually the child can talk with the parent.
They're the comfort zone.
So as a parent, you do need to get other people involved to support the child.
To be honest, that's not where the needs are, are they? So you do need to get everyone on board. And then the kind of main do's then are just increasing confidence and self-esteem, and trying to decrease that loneliness and isolation.
And how would you increase a child's confidence and self-esteem who's got selective mutism?
In loads of different ways. It might be that you help them get into a hobby that they really love. It could be getting them to do like the gratitude diaries. So doing 3 things each night that they're really thankful for from that day. It can be keeping a compliment jar. So I know I keep a compliment jar. So anytime someone ever gives me a praise or anything like that, I make a note on a post-it note and put it in a jar, and you can just see it build up. And sometimes if you need to look at those, then you've got that to build the confidence. Then there's loads of different ways.
I always like the homeschool books, because, a teacher, and there are only positive comments allowed in these books, but where the teachers would write, something that they're thankful for, something they appreciate or admire about the child that day. And then it goes home with the child, and then the parent can write something. And it's so nice to share that, to help build the confidence and self-esteem of these children.
Absolutely. And I quite like when they invite the child to help them. They come over and say, oh, look, this is what I'm going to put today. Do you think that's good? Or was there something else that I've forgotten? And then they can list loads of different positives then, and that can really just help the child get kind of in a good position.
And even if the child isn't able to speak and say, oh, this, you could ask their friends.
Absolutely.
To say, what's gone well today? What have you admired about,
And talking about friends, I really enjoy the lunch bag idea.
Oh, okay, tell me about that.
So that's where you get you have to vet it, obviously, but you get everyone in the class to write something positive about either everyone. So they write one thing about everyone in the class, or you pair them up, so they have to write it about someone else. And and then it goes into a lunch bag, and then they get it at the end of the day with all these lovely positive comments from all their peers.
That's nice. That's lovely.
It also helps with that sense of belonging within the class. So that would help with the isolation and the loneliness.
Absolutely. And that's kindness, and that's free, isn't it? It doesn't cost anything. And I think and it's so important for us to help our children to recognize strengths in others as well, because that peer relationships and affiliation, like that sense of belonging within a group, is so important. So if, as much as they may have a teacher that's really loving and nurturing and caring towards them, it's so important to get the whole class as a group to recognize strengths in each other, to build that community sense. Because I think sometimes we're lacking that, aren't we, with our groups, larger groups.
I think so.
What else can family members do then to support a child with potential selective mutism?
Link up with the schools and kind of try and offer opportunities for the child or young person to interact with adults if they're more confident in interacting with adults than the children.
Okay, but could that be like a teaching assistant?
Yes, yeah,
or an
absolutely, or an else there, or get someone there that they can feel confident enough to talk to them.
Yeah,
I would
even dinner ladies.
Absolutely.
The kids love the dinner ladies, don't they? So, I think, like you're saying, get everyone involved, isn't it?
100%.
Yeah.
You're never going to know which adult the child responds best to as well.
Yeah.
Because every child's going to have someone different that they like.
They know, don't they? So what else can we do?
We can offer prompts. So if, your child seems lost or unsure in different situations, you can say, kind of, Monica, can you help Sally play dress up?
Okay.
Or Sandra, do you have the £5 note for the cashier? And that kind of thing. So you're prompting them to go, oh, this is what I can initiate. I can initiate this.
And what you're saying there is that you're trying to initiate physical communication, as in getting the £5 out and presenting it to the cashier. So as much as we as parents want our children to speak, actually it's those physical acts which is also communication. So handing the money over, opening the door for someone, things like that.
And those tend to be, although they're quite anxiety provoking, they're easier than the talking aspects.
And they're fleeting as well, they're very quick.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In some cases, some children and young people may benefit from being rewarded for kind of all attempts of communication then. So as we were saying, it can be those gestures of giving the £5 note, eye contact, smiles, and they should be praised for any kind of participation in social activities at all.
Yeah.
But just be mindful that for some, this may create more pressure. So if your child would really struggle and would see it as being a failure if they weren't able to smile that day, then maybe that's not right for you.
Yeah. Okay.
Then we've got in school, it's really important that activities are provided where whole classes move, they talk, or they sing in a group.
Okay.
So that they can't be seen as being different because everyone's doing it.
But it gets blend in.
Absolutely. And it gets them doing the movements that are really anxiety provoking without them realizing they're doing these movements.
Lovely, I like that. Yeah, no, that's a good idea. So when they're singing in the choir, they can just pretend to move their mouth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great.
Absolutely.
They don't have to remember the words, they don't have to speak the words, just got to move their mouth. And that reduces that pressure, doesn't it?
100%.
But they're still part of it.
They're still part of it. And also it's getting, half the anxiety battle is kind of getting you over the first hurdle.
Yeah.
So if you're doing it in a group, you're over that first hurdle already, and then the rest will slot into place.
Okay, good.
Then we can kind of ask them to choose.
Okay.
If they're going to do a verbal or non-verbal response.
Right.
That choice element just means that they feel more in control of the anxiety.
And they participated.
Absolutely.
Yeah. As like you're saying, even if they just said that one or that one, or even just non-verbally just pointed to whatever, that is still an act of communication, which should be recognised, shouldn't it?
Absolutely. And for schools then, in particular, teachers should ask, who wants to tell me something? or say something instead of making the child or young person wait to speak. So if they want to say it, they can say it then. They've got that opportunity to talk if they really want to.
So what you're saying there, that sometimes children with selective mutism might really want to say something but can't put their hand up to say it. So it's important for the teacher to allow them that space to verbalize it.
Absolutely. And it might be that if they have to wait for 5 other kids to go, then they're not going to be able to. The anxiety will build up too much. If they're able to get it out straight away, then they'll be able to talk.
And then that's a success, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We need lots of those to help them, don't we?
As parents, you can help develop scripts for the child or young person.
So what do you mean by that?
So that's just kind of answers to everyday conversation. You can have a list of things like kind of if someone says, oh, I really love your shoes, where did you get them? Oh, well then I would answer this. Or I could answer this. Or how was your weekend? What did you do? Well, I can answer this. And those kind of scripts mean that there's less anxiety because they don't have to think of the answers. They can just kind of verbally just go, oh, I've got this, and can reel it off.
And that's really important because, as you said earlier, you know, children with selective mutism, not only are they unable to speak, but also process information.
Absolutely.
So when someone asks quite a complicated question, sometimes they don't understand the question because they're feeling anxious. There may be a lot of language involved in that. And what I've told children to say in the past is like, I'm not sure, I'll come back to you. You know, because that gives them that out. They don't have to have remembered what that person was saying or be able to kind of problem solve that question, but they can say, look, you know, I'll have to come back to you, you know, and it's giving them that out option, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the other issue in schools, it won't really affect the parents, but you can talk to your schools about this, is registration time. Because it's a lot of pressure, it's a lot of kind of, you know, eyes on the child. So you can kind of think of different ways of encouraging the class to kind of answer in alternative ways. So maybe if they can do non-verbals, it's the nodding, or maybe they can raise their hands. Sometimes silly voices. Sometimes silly voices can make it easier. So a lot of children with selective mutism might kind of bark or meow because it's easier to be a cat or a dog than yourself. Or they can talk through puppets. Or they do the silly voices because it's not their voice. So maybe that would work for this individual. Or maybe just get the teachers to greet the pupils. So then no one has to talk. And it's just going, oh, Sally, I see you. How are you today? And that kind of thing. And maybe that's an easier way of doing that registration so that you're not kind of putting the pressure on the individuals.
I think it's important to note there that you mentioned earlier about, you know, selective mutism isn't just that anxiety about talking, but it's also about expressing stuff about yourself.
Absolutely.
That personal information. So I think it's really important for us to remember about, you know, when we do try and interact with these children, is not to ask them personal information, really. It's more to be kind of generalized.
Absolutely. Closed questions are better a lot of the time until you work up. You can work up to the open-ended questions. Then as well. If possible, creating specific discrete gestures or signs when you're out in public so that they can go, you know, you can look at the sign language or sign along for toilet and things like that. So if you're in public, the individual can ask you, oh, I need to go to the toilet, doing that sign rather than speaking, if that's easier for them. But once again, that's still initiating conversation. So that still might be too hard for some people with selective mutism.
Absolutely.
And then allowing the child to see an activity or the expectation prior to it happening can
so giving them that pre-warning about what's going to happen, what they could expect, what would be expected of them.
Absolutely. It's kind of minimizing the anxieties in other aspects then. So you're minimizing the unknown for them. So you're making them feel more comfortable about this is what we're going to do. We're going to be okay. This is what's going to happen.
Like giving them that pre-warning, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You mentioned a lot there about, you know, what parents can do, what schools can do, and it's really helpful. I'm just wondering though, is there anything we shouldn't do?
Well, that is a really important question because there are some things that you absolutely should not do.
Because I can imagine it's, you know, people want the children to speak, so it's like you know, in a way, you want to try and force them to speak, and actually that would be the worst thing you could do, isn't it? You know,
100%. So as you say, you shouldn't pressure the child or young person to speak. Pressuring the child or young person to speak, giving the child or young person too much attention, either when they speak or when they haven't spoken, and pressuring them to mix with other children, as they may need kind of more support with that, will probably make them feel very uncomfortable due to the kind of the amount of attention that these things require.
So it's kind of being more discreet, isn't it, rather?
Yeah. You shouldn't ask direct questions, as you mentioned earlier. That just put the child or young person at the centre of the attention. You shouldn't withhold kind of rewards simply because they haven't spoken. They want to speak, but they can't.
Yeah.
You should not use negative labels, especially within the kind of child's earshot. So you shouldn't be going, oh, that's the quiet one, and things like that.
Yeah.
You shouldn't treat them delicately, though.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
So Maggie Johnson, who is kind of the guru in selective mutism, always states that young people with selective mutism enjoy that kind of the banter as well.
Yeah.
So we should make sure that they're included in that.
Yeah.
They've got a fear, they've got an anxiety. That doesn't mean they don't like jokes.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly. And that's the thing, isn't it? Just because they seem to be socially isolated doesn't mean they want to be either, you know? So yeah, you're right. It's really important to include them in typical kind of social communication and interaction styles, isn't it? With that
100%.
banter and jokes and things like that.
You shouldn't allow them to become isolated.
No.
That's absolutely correct. And then lastly, you should not anticipate their every need. Instead, hold back, give them permission, just say, oh, it's okay to, and then create opportunities for them to start taking the lead. As I said earlier, it's very easy for them to get into the habit of not talking.
Yeah.
So if they're expected to not talk in every single situation, then you're not going to talk. It's easier for you. It's easier for everyone, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we need to give them the lead in some situations as well.
And it's about supporting them to take that one next step, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You know, with that gentle encouragement, but while still being there to support them. And each time you do that, it's like just chipping away gently at it.
Absolutely. We in kind of psychology use the comfort, stretch, panic zone.
Yeah.
And the kind of the comfort zone, especially in selective mutism, can feel like a straitjacket.
Yeah.
And we just, as long as we are poking out of that straitjacket, it gets looser and looser.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to do for these children.
And it's gently over time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's important to note that. Thank you, Kathryn. It's been wonderful having you here today to talk about such an interesting topic as selective mutism. I've learned a lot, and I hope our parents today have enjoyed and obviously learned a lot as well. As I said before, there's obviously a wealth of information online that is going to be included in the episode description. But before you go, I just wanted to know, is there a message that you would like to end on for our parents of Neetka Talbot?
Well, my favourite quote is by, and I apologise if I have butchered this name, but Blow 2020, who stated, with appropriate support, the student with selective mutism can achieve academically and develop social relationships. Helping students gain comfort and confidence at school fosters an environment in which they experience less anxiety and increase the level and variety of communication at school. So basically, although selective mutism is a very serious disorder, we must remember that it's not the be-all and end-all, and with the correct help, these children can once again flourish.
Thank you. And in true Tonnau Talks style, we always end with our Tonnau top tips. So Kathryn, can you tell us what are our Tonnau top tips for selective mutism?
Absolutely. So remember that selective mutism is not a choice. Remember that pressuring a child to speak can have the opposite effect. Therefore, we need to be alongside them on their journey, make them feel comfortable in order to help them attempt facing their fears. We don't want to anticipate their every need, and we want to give gentle encouragement to try aspects outside of that comfort zone. Remember their communication styles may be different, so some may be able to communicate with friends, but not adults. Some may use slight amounts of language, or some may not be able to communicate at all outside of the home, etc. And remember that selective mutism is not the be-all and end-all, and with the correct help, these children can once again flourish.
Oh, thank you. That's lovely. Thank you everyone for joining us today. For those of you who've been listening live, really appreciate you coming on board with us today. If you can see on the screen, if you are watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see on the screen currently we have our evaluation code, and we've got our QR codes there for access to our other sessions that we've recorded. So they are available on Amazon Music. They're also available on Spotify and our YouTube channel. Also, please note that there's a really there's a new section that we're going to be doing, which we can't wait to launch, but we need you as parents to participate in this. So we are launching Tonnau Talks, which is growth in Welsh. It's all about learning and improving and, you know, supporting one another. We'd really like if you'd be able to scan that QR code there and email in with a question that you want us to answer. So we can't wait to launch that. That will be launched in the new year, and we will be answering questions from our Neath Talbot parents. Thank you, diolch yn fawr. Thank you for joining us today for our Tonnau Talks session on selective mutism.